I'm currently a product manager at Pinterest. Before that, I was actually in business school getting my MBA. I also started a company there. Before that, I worked on Wall Street, did investment banking and private equity. So I like to pivot a lot in product terms. And my key takeaways for you tonight are these. First, I'll talk about how to find a good opportunity for you by matching the role to your skills and your strengths. Second, I'll talk about finding a chance to work on that opportunity by showing how you can add value to that role. And then finally, I'll talk about how to be successful in that role by setting and exceeding expectations. So before I get into the fun stuff, I'm really passionate about this topic, not only because I moved into product management a year ago, Pinterest, but a lot of my friends have actually done this, and my husband also moved into product at Airbnb. So I've seen this happen a lot, and so what I'll talk to you about is a combination of my experience and all the people that I've seen go through it, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you. So starting with finding the right opportunity for you. Why do you want to move into product? I assume you're all here because you're interested in the role, want to learn more about it. I think you should really think about what is motivating that decision. Product is a very hot topic right now, and I think it's important for you to make a decision not based on the fact that it's hot, but because it's a really good fit for you. So a few reasons I decided to move into product. I love the cross-functional nature. I loved working with engineers, designers, data analysts, and being able to work with different people on a team. I also wanted to build something. So when I was in business school, I mentioned I started a company. It was really cool for me to create a product and then have people use that product in the real world. So I wanted to do that again. And so ultimately, I moved into product for the impact. I liked building things for people and improving their lives at a company whose mission I really believe in. So there's a lot of great reasons to move into product. These are some of them. There are many more. However, there are also some downsides. It's not the perfect role. The first of which is that you're in a lot of meetings. And I kid you not, every time I schedule a meeting with someone, they say, "Oh my gosh, your calendar is insane. You're completely booked for the next 2 weeks." And it's usually like that. And that's because it is a very cross-functional role, which means the product manager is meeting with different people all the time. That is a big part of my job. So something to consider if you don't like meetings or working with a lot of other people, this may not be a good fit. There are definitely other reasons why it might not be a good fit. This is a really challenging role. I won't go into those during this talk, but that's not the focus of today, but I'm definitely happy to talk to you about those. But it's a really fun and exciting role, but it's also a really hard role. So think about both of those things as you're making the move. So what makes a great PM? I love this diagram. It's by Jackie Bavaro. She has a great article about it on Medium. Basically, it's a mix of two things, strategy and execution. So strategy is figuring out what we should build, and then execution is making that happen. And so this is kind of a mix of those two and all the skills required to create a product and then execute on that product. And this is a pretty long list because, like I said, it's a really challenging role. So most people who are product managers end up doing at least some of these skills and needing to do most of these skills decently well, and then being really, really good at a few of them, depending on the role. And we'll go back to this list later. So the cool thing about product is that you can join from a number of different backgrounds. So let's take a quick straw poll. Who here is in analytics? Awesome. What about engineering? Great. What about business roles? Biz ops, biz dev, biz something? Great. What about designers? Awesome. Sales? User ops or support? Anyone I missed?
Consulting.
Great. Another typical one. Yeah, so I think the good thing is you can move into product from any of these roles. I personally was in biz ops. I grouped business as a kind of catch-all for a bunch of other different types of roles. But these are the three that I've seen typically people come from at Pinterest. And so that's just my experience. I showed this slide to my husband and he said, no, this is not at all what it's like at Airbnb. So it definitely depends on the company. And I think we'll talk about why each of these fields might be helpful for moving into product. But if you're not on that list, that's okay. You can move into this role from basically any other role. So these are 3 specific transitions I've seen at Pinterest. Someone I know was on our analytics team, and she became a PM on our content safety efforts. So this is making sure that people don't use Pinterest for spam. Someone else I know, she was an engineer, and she moved into a role that we call unauth, basically helping people log in and sign up for Pinterest. And then the last one is me. I was in biz ops and strategy, and I moved into an advertiser growth PM role. So these are 3 pretty different backgrounds, pretty different PM roles. The big takeaway here is that the roles and their skills that they require match the people moving into that role and their background. So an analytical role where the PM is doing a lot of analytics, the work requires a lot of data. It's probably going to be helpful for that person to have a data background. Similarly, if you're thinking about a technical role, having an engineering background will probably be really helpful there. And then last, a role that is maybe more ambiguous or newer, having a strategic background will be helpful. And then you can apply this with all the other roles we talked about. So what does this mean? Think about those skills we talked about earlier. Which ones are you good at? So your homework tonight, and yes, I'm giving you homework, is to take this list and write down the skills that you're very good at today and the ones that you want to work on. So this is actually my list. The things on the left, I was pretty good at already based on my role before I moved into product. So analytics, communication, leadership, and then the things on the right, had no idea what they were. And so the good news is it's okay to have a list of things that you want to work on. This is really important because, like I said, it's really helpful as a product manager to be pretty good at all of these skills and really good at some of them. So remember to take a look at this list for yourself and evaluate which things you're great at and which ones you want to work on. There's also 3 types of PM roles I've heard people talk about. Again, this is borrowing someone else's framework. There's a lot of really good content about product out there. I love this one. This is by Sachin Rekhi, and he talks about 3 types of PMs. So the first type is someone who is an innovator. Think Steve Jobs, who's working on a product that is new, and that person is bringing that product to market. So it requires having a big grand vision, knowing what the customer wants before they even want that, and really proving that out and scaling something from nothing to something really successful. So this type of role is really helpful if you have that experience already. If you can think about strategy and understanding what to build before it's even out there. This role terrifies me, but I actually ended up doing a little bit of it. So Google Glass is a good example of this, where it's a product that didn't exist. They brought it to market. It didn't work. Sometimes that happens. And this role sometimes at smaller companies, many PMs are doing because the company itself is still trying to figure out if they have product market fit. So that's role number 1. Another kind is what he calls builders. So basically this is a product that already exists or a company that already exists. And your job is to really make it better. So that means working with the customers or the users, figuring out what they need, and then really ruthlessly prioritizing that to help build a better product. So this is really great if you have a background in product design and you can really easily distill the customer pain points and then put those into a roadmap. So that's type 2. The Android system is a good one. That's something that's built over many years. So product managers on this, he would classify as builders. And then last, he calls them tuners. So I have the Google home screen because it's very optimized. So this is someone who is working on a product that's been around for a very long time, or in the context of the company, a long time. And the goal of this type of PM is to really tune and make it as good as possible through a lot of A/B tests and experimentation. So a really good fit for this type of role is someone who is very analytical, really likes to work very action-oriented and really cares about moving metrics. Typically, growth teams look for these types of people. And obviously, those are all different types of jobs. So you can be a product manager and work on one of these 3 different products and have a very different experience from someone that works on the other one. And it's also not to say that every role falls very squarely into each of these buckets. Most roles have a mix of the 3 and just way more heavily towards one. So I would say my role actually started more as an innovator and then is now somewhere between builder and tuner because of my story, which I'll tell you later. Sometimes that can happen. Your role can evolve or it may change based on the company. So this is one way to think about types of roles and your background and how that could be a fit. So the first takeaway is find a role that matches your strengths. Take that list of things you're great at and look for jobs or even job postings where those words match the things that you already bring to the table. Okay, so now that you've found the role that you want, how do you actually get that opportunity? So this will really vary depending on the size of the company. So if you're at a small unicorn and that company is moving really quickly, still trying to find product market fit, or you're looking at this type of company, the process will likely be very informal. There's probably a lot going on, people wearing many different hats. So if you're in that company already, you may actually be able to just start doing the work. The bigger you go, and at the other end of the spectrum, a really large established company like a Google or Facebook, the process is probably more structured and formal. So typically there's actually a set process on taking on a 20% project, doing that for a certain period of time, and then an official conversion process at the end. And then of course there's a range in between. Pinterest was something in the middle where there was sort of a process, but not really. And I don't think that there's actually a benefit to being at one or the other. So think about whether you're at a company where you want to make the move and then know that that will probably fit on one of these. I will say that typically it's easier to move once you're at the company. So it's easier because people know you already and you can convince them to take a chance on you. However, if you aren't in a position where you can do that, I think it's totally fine to try to go somewhere else. You will likely have more luck doing that at a smaller company because, like I said, they're more willing to take a chance. But I know people that have done both at both types of companies, so there's no hard and fast rule. So how do you actually get that first project? Well, it's kind of obvious. You have to raise your hand. And there's 2 approaches here. So the first would be finding a PM that you know and actually going to that person and saying, hey, I am interested in learning that product. I'd like to take on a small project for you. Like, what can I help with? And usually PMs who are very busy will be very happy for the help. So the goal there is just to find someone that you know and convince them to give you that project. The other approach, and this is actually the approach I took, was I found an area that no one was working in. And this was actually my job at the time in BizOps. I came up with a strategy for that area and I presented that to our executive team and I said, hey, we really need to be doing this. We should form a team around it. And then I ended up working on it. So depending on your current role and your current company, you may be able to do one or the other, but you have to take that step and really express your interest. And it's really good to do this with your current manager as well, the person who you report to, because having his or her buy-in will help you be able to take that on, and having their support will help you down the road. It's also just good practice to tell them what you're spending your time on, especially if it's 20% of your day. My hiring manager was really supportive, and it ended up being really helpful later on when I transitioned. And when I say 20% project, usually it's more like your 120% project. So you've got your day job, that doesn't usually go away, and you end up taking another 20% on. That was the case for me, and I was okay with that, but maybe your manager will let you scale down on your existing duties. It kind of depends. So when you're thinking about types of projects to take on, a couple things to keep an eye out for. The first, and I would say probably the best, are really small, easily defined projects. Basically something where someone said, we really need to do this, and they just haven't yet. And it's areas that are really scoped and well-defined that are likely to be successful, that are good, because then the person you ask to work on will be really happy to give it to you because they know that it's very low risk for them. It's likely you can kind of just do what needs to be done and everyone's happy. So that's the first kind. Second is kind of the opposite, a new kind of blue ocean exploratory initiative where because no one's working on it, it's really easy for you to step in and kind of just start doing the job. And then a third kind, which isn't necessarily mutually exclusive, is something that is actually an extension of your role today. So maybe you're working with the user support team and you see an opportunity to work more closely with product, kind of where, think of a place where you already have some domain expertise and you already maybe work with a PM and you can kind of leverage that experience to bring what you already know about that space to that project. So things to think about when you're identifying that project. If you can't think of a project right away or can't find one at your current company, I do encourage you to think about transition roles. So what this means is if you don't know a PM or a project or you're not able to find one at your company, I would try to think about another way to get closer to product. And so this might mean finding a new role at your existing company, or it might mean going somewhere else. But I think this is really important because it will help you work on those skills that you talked about earlier that you want to develop, learn more about product by working closely with it, and learn people who are product managers that you can work with. So 3 that I've listed, and there are many more. The first is a product marketing manager. It sounds like a product manager. The job is very similar in a lot of ways. So you're basically trying to figure out how do we take this product to market and communicate it effectively. So if you're trying to get experience in communication, understanding the customer, leadership, this is a really good one to consider. And this exists at both consumer and B2B companies. Another role is a product analyst. So they can be called data analyst or data scientist depending on the company. This is a very analytical role and often very technical. So if those are skills you're interested in, this is a great role to consider and I think a really helpful one if you end up moving into product because analytics is really important as a product manager. And on that note, I want to touch on SQL. So when I joined Pinterest, I didn't know what SQL was. I had to take a test on it and I had to figure out what it was. And I learned it for my interview and in my job. And now I would say I'm pretty good at SQL. I highly, highly encourage learning SQL. It's not required at every company. At Pinterest, it certainly is. But I think if you can take the time to learn it, which is pretty easy to do, and there's a lot of really good free resources, this will really help up-level your skills at PM. A big part of your job is synthesizing data, and being able to extract that data through SQL will really help you move more quickly and not have to rely on other people. So this is a background where learning SQL is required, but even if you don't move into this type of role, I would think about how you can learn SQL if that's not something that you use already. And then the last role, which we have at Pinterest, these don't exist everywhere, is a technical program manager. So this is a person who works with engineers on more programs and projects and initiatives. So they definitely have very deep technical skills, organizational skills, communication. This is a role that I know someone who went from the user support team to a technical program manager and now is moving into product. So it's a really effective one for learning more of the project management skill set. So think about if you're in a role today where you don't see a project or you don't work closely with product, these are ways to move a little bit closer and take that step forward. The other piece of moving into this project, it's much easier to do this if you can get pulled in. And this is where having relationships with product managers is really helpful. It's much easier to take a risk on someone if you know that person. And so doing the move in a role where the person knows you and trusts you and has more confidence in your work is just a lot easier than trying to convince someone who doesn't know you at all to take a chance on you, because they could just hire someone that's been a product manager before. So the hiring manager is really important. The person that you do the project with, if they're the one that's hiring for a role, going to them directly is good, because then if you do a good job, they'll just hire you. But also, allies are important in other roles as well. So I mentioned it's a really cross-functional role. So if you work with engineers or designers or analysts, those can be really good people to leverage too, because they will have a say in whether you can make that move. So the second takeaway is think about how you can add value and convince someone to take a chance on you by moving into that project. This is from an ABBA song, in case anyone else was wondering where it's from. So that's part 2. And so once you find the role, you've convinced someone to let you try it, let's talk about how to make the most of it. It's really important to have a growth mindset during this process. I think you all have probably heard of growth mindset. It's this idea of being open to learning new things and new possibilities. I highly encourage you to take this on because when you start to work in product, you are starting from scratch, and that can be really humbling when you probably have done your job for some number of years beforehand. Think about going to doing your job the very first thing you did out of college, where you don't know much and you're new and you're likely to make mistakes. It's good to keep that in mind because it's important to have that learning mindset and knowing the things that you do and don't know. This is again why knowing the skills you're good at and the ones you want to develop on is good up front, because it'll just tell you to know, keep yourself from having blind spots about things that you don't yet know. So I actually recommend doing these 3 things regardless of whether you move into product or in any role. I do this every time I have a conversation with my manager. The first is create a learning plan. My manager laughed at me when I did this, but I made a list of the skills that I thought I needed to work on and agreed with him on what they were. And then I made a plan on how I was going to tackle those things. And so that included taking classes at places like product school, reading books, articles, anything you can do to address that skill gap. That shows that you have initiative. It is helpful for learning those skills to be better at your job. And then it closes that gap between where you are today and where you want to be when you become a product manager. The second piece that's really helpful is having a peer mentor, someone that you know that's a product manager, not necessarily the person that you're going to do the project for, but someone who knows you that can help you learn the basics. So figuring out how to do your first experiment or write your first PRD, anything you're doing for the first time, this is someone you can ask the dumb questions and they won't judge you. I had someone who was a rock star PM at Pinterest mentor me, and he would spend 2 hours a day with me my first week. And it was really helpful just to say, like, I have no idea what I'm doing. Can you please explain this? And he did. And the good thing is most of the work for a product manager is very learnable. So having someone kind of guide you through that initial process is really helpful. And then the second time you do something, you'll know what to do. And the last thing is asking for feedback. Feedback is a fun word that sometimes I get really uncomfortable when someone says, I have some feedback for you. But I do think it's a gift at this point because you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what you might be doing wrong. And so asking for that feedback gives people permission to tell you what you might be not doing as well. And then you have a chance to correct it. So I actually encourage, again, doing this in any role, but when you're new to product, asking about the area that you said you want to work on. So, hey, I'm working on my technical skills. Can you take a look at this SQL query? Is there a better way to do it? Or, hey, I'm really trying to figure out this product sense thing. How would you think about that in this project? You can ask this from other PMs, designers, engineers, analysts, anyone you work with. And the question I usually ask is, who's the best PM you've ever worked with? How would they do this differently? And see what kind of answer they give me. So this is having a growth mindset, super critical. The second is building trust. Again, important in most roles, extra important in product because it's so cross-functional. So this is really with the core people that you work with on a day-to-day basis, engineering, design, analytics, and depending on your company, potentially a few other roles. These are the people who, like I said, will have a big say in whether you can make the move. And you really want them to be on your side and trust you. Some examples of earning trust. Bring in food and snacks for the team. I know that sounds silly, but it really works. People like to celebrate things. Find a reason to bring in a snack and people will really like that. Also just grabbing lunch or coffee or breakfast with people and talking about not work stuff and getting to know them on a day-to-day basis. Doing an icebreaker at the beginning of your team meeting, ways to just get to know and connect. And especially important if this is a new team for you, to sit with the team. Ask if you can just pull up a chair and sit there on your laptop while you're working, because this will help you have those side conversations on like, hey, how did we think about this again? Or, hey, could you take a quick look at this? That are harder to do over Slack and email, but will just move much more quickly. And again, will help establish that trust with everyone. So when you're first in the role, you will likely be doing what I would call project management. In fact, my first few months on the job, I asked one of my engineers, hey, Shashank, how do you think I'm doing? And he said, Tamara, I think you're a great project manager. Now you should start thinking about being a product manager. And I was like, what does that mean? I think I get it now. Basically, when you first start out, your job is to do anything that you can to help the team, unblock the team. So that might mean taking notes at a meeting, or setting up a meeting, or analyzing user research, anything that is really critical that will help move things forward. Often this is working cross-functionally, getting approval from legal for something, or getting marketing assets, things that engineers or analysts or designers don't know how to do or don't want to do. And that's kind of annoying, but that helps you get some credibility. And eventually, over time, you start moving into product management, which is thinking about the vision and determining the strategy and building a great product experience. But in the beginning, you probably don't know what that is yet. And so you can be really helpful in just being useful. And this will really vary depending on the team that you're working with. So if you're on a team where people have been there for a really long time, the team has been around for a while, and it's pretty known that there's a list of things that need to be done, you can just do those things. But if you join a team that's new, like my team, then you might be doing really different things, or you might have to come up with those things that you think will be helpful. One of the things I did was lobbied for us to all get space to sit together. The team really wanted this. I thought it would be important, so I spent like a week talking to people and getting desks. And that is not a skill that a product manager needs to have, but it was a really big unlock for the team because it helped us move really quickly in the future. So once you're in the role, you'll probably just start to fill in those gaps, and then over time, you'll start to add more value in a unique product way. So lastly, when you're in the role, think about how you can set expectations and then exceed those expectations. So if you're in a more formal role or project where it's 20% and it's a bigger company, I would be really clear about the person you're working with. What are the things that are expected of me and on what time frame? How will we measure success for this project? Are there milestones? Are there deliverables? Is it a number of experiments I need to ship? Whose feedback will you get? Talk about that up front, because then if it's a set time frame, you can set up regular check-ins and see how you're doing. So every week or two saying, hey, last time we talked about this milestone, I just hit it early, and I also did this other thing. That will help you feel like you're on track, and the person who you're talking to will feel like you're able to execute on what you say you do. And that's actually a big part of being a product manager, is saying something and then actually doing it on time or early. And I recommend taking a hustle mentality, which means really work hard during this time frame. You've gotten someone to give you a shot. They've invested time in you, and you have this cool opportunity. Do a really great job. It might be the only chance you get to prove how great you are. So when I was doing this, I stayed late. I came in early. I worked on weekends because it was really important for me not to mess this up. And I think it paid off. I think that I was able to do things in advance or on time, and people were really impressed, and it set up a good reputation for me that then follows me going forward. So those are the 3 takeaways. Let's talk about my specific journey into product. This is really aggressive. I will start by saying that. I actually think that if I could do this all over again, I would take much more time because the role is really challenging and you need time to learn it. So about a year and a half ago, I was in a role in BizOps, and part of that role was figuring out a new strategy for how we work with small and medium advertisers. And so I came up with a proposal on what that would look like. I presented it to our head of product and our COO, and they said, yep, makes sense, we should do this. Who's gonna work on it? And so we had to hustle to find people that would work on it. And basically this first step was inadvertently identifying this role. I wasn't actually trying to become a product manager, but I found an opportunity that would be a good fit for me because it was strategic in a new area where I'd done a lot of the research and the work on what it should look like. I proposed that plan and made it happen. So then next, we started trying to form a team around this. We assembled a tiger team of one analyst, one designer, and one engineer. And I distinctly remember sitting in a room with those people, and everyone's like, so who's the product manager? And my friend Pam's like, Tamara, do you want to be the product manager? And I said, absolutely, I'd love to. This sounds great. And it kind of just happened. And I hope you're as lucky because that is a once in a lifetime chance. But this was me inadvertently raising my hand. So this team was formed and the charter was, let's spend 90 days working on this initiative and proving out if it's something the company wants to invest in. So it was really helpful. We had a clear timeline. I had a clear timeline for how long I would get to work on it. And that's how it was kind of born. So then the next month, I had a learning plan and I found a mentor who was helping me. So I had a lot of firsts. My first experiment, my first PRD, my first team meeting, a lot of feedback. And this was really hard. It was learning a whole new skill completely from scratch. But I realized that I actually really loved the work and it was really energizing and really challenging and I just loved it. So then the next month, the team actually started to show impact. All of our charts, before we started working on it, went like this, and then we started working on it and went like this. That is a dream of a product manager to say, like, the chart's moving because of what I'm doing. And so that got a lot of attention from our executive team. They were really excited. And this is when I was really trying to work with my cross-functional team to build that trust. So I was, like I said, bringing in treats and getting coffee and trying to be helpful in any way possible and really hustling. This was also really tricky because I was about to get married. The 90 days ended and then a week later I was leaving for my wedding. So if anyone's ever gotten married, that's a very stressful time. I don't recommend moving into product in the 90 days before your wedding, but that happened to be my timeline. And so at the end of this period, as the 90 days were kind of ending, I said, hey, I really like this work. I think I want to do it full time. And I interviewed and then I moved into the role. So the team was formally funded because it was doing so well. I went off to get married and then I came back and here I am a year later still working on this product. So I had kind of an interesting experience. You may not have the same transition at your company, but I do recommend thinking about ways you can apply some of the lessons I mentioned to help with your transition. So again, 3 takeaways. Sounds pretty simple. Find a role where you can match your strengths to the skills that are required for that role. Show how you can add value to get that chance. And then lastly, set and exceed those expectations and hustle. As you're thinking about making the move, I wanted to share some resources that I find really valuable. I still have a learning plan and I still read up a lot about product. There's a lot out there. So Silicon Valley Product Group has a great newsletter. PMHQ has a great newsletter and First Round, and they will cover all sorts of topics. So again, it's helpful to have that list of 4 things that you're working on so you can read the things that are useful for you. And then 3 of the many, many articles I've read that are helpful. First, What Makes a Great Product Manager by Lawrence Ripcher, who is the head of product at Pinterest. He also speaks about the product manager and the feminine, which I love. The second, which I actually found really helpful as thinking about for this talk, Lenny Rachitsky, who is a product manager at Airbnb. talks about how to get into product management. And he has a lot of great resources in this one for all of those skills that we talked about earlier. And then last, Product Mental Models for Everyone by Brandon Chu. Lots more out there. If you have a specific topic you're interested in, start with one of these, and the second one will actually take you down rabbit holes for things that you're trying to learn. That's it.